Okay, if you guys remember, uh, the other week, I made my predictions about what the stock market was going to do when we were having that downturn. And a lot of these other guys were wrong. They said the stock market's going to keep crashing and all this kind of stuff, And I said, no, she's going to turn around. We're going to have a recovery. We're going to have in fact, I said we might even make new highs in the stock market. Now, my predictions, there's reasons why I make these predictions the way they are. And in this episode right here, I'm going to let you know what my reasons were and how I got it right and how I figured it out. And I'm also going to let you know what's going to happen next. And I'm not doing it. I don't have any crystal ball or anything like that. I'm doing it from logical deduction. It's what Sherlock Holmes used to do when he used to figure a case out. And people, it's like magic. How does he know that? But what he did was he used logical deduction to actually figure out what was going to happen and who did it in Sherlock Holmes' case. Now, me, it's what's going to happen. And I'm using logical deduction to figure it out. And I'm going to let you in on my thinking. And some of the things might sound a little bit silly, but you'll see that it's logical. And it's why I think that there's a crash coming. And one of several spots it's going to come. I think it's either going to come in April or August. And I'm going to logically let you in on my progression of thought and why I think it's going to come in one of these 2 months. And it's going to be an enormous crash. And some of you people out there are saying to yourself, well, how big a crash are you talking? How big a crash? I'm going to tell you how big right now so you can have an idea. The stock at this exuberance that came from Trump and all this kind of stuff that happened, it was down around 14,000. And I think it's going to go below that exuberance. It's probably going to overshoot it, maybe by 1,000 or 2,000. So we're probably looking at 12,000 on the stock market. Now, for you guys out there, say right now, you say, oh, 12, I'll never go down to 12,000. Right? I want you to think back about the crash in 1929. If we had the exact same magnitude crash that they had in 1929, exactly the same magnitude, the stock market would go to 2,800. 2,800. Now, I'm saying 12,000. So I'm not talking about the same magnitude. So if it was like an earthquake, what they had in 1929 would be like 10. And I'm talking an earthquake is going to be more moderate, more about a 7 or an 8, if it was earthquakes. Okay? But now we're talking stock market crashes. And so what we're looking at here is we're going to be looking at a stock market crash. I think it's going to around 12,000. And I have reasons why I say that, and that has to do with deduction. Well, I might as well. Tonight, I'm opening up and I'm giving you my logic and the way I think. And why I'm saying 12,000. I'll tell you why. It's because generally a market has a rise point where it goes up to make it a wave. And that's what this is. This is a wave, and we're cresting the wave right now. Okay? What was the starting point when it started to make that big wave, the big wave? Generally, that's what it's going to go back to. The starting point was 14,000. And I'm expecting, because of fear and stuff, it to overshoot that, and it to actually go down a little bit lower, but then it'll rebound. So this is my logical way of thinking. I'm thinking probably 12,000, and it'll rebound back to 14,000 later after the crash. This is what I'm thinking, because that's what it was back before when Trump was running for presidency, back before all this exuberance that come in and shot the stock market to the moon, before the melt-up. Before all of that, it was 14,000. And then it went 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, and it's just nuts. That's just all built on hype. It's a bubble. The stock market's a bubble, just like Bitcoin's a bubble. Okay? So this is what we're looking at. Now, I got an article that one of my viewers sent in here, and I found it extremely interesting. It comes from Dave Kranzler. It says, is the Fed back to quantitative easing? It asks a question. It says the Fed added $11 billion to its SOMA account for the week ending Wednesday. It purchased $11 billion in mortgage securities directly from banks. This injects $11 billion into the banking system. Cash is a high-powered money, meaning it can be leveraged 10 times. Banks need to hold 10% in reserves against high-powered money. Actually, it's less than that. It's like 6% or something. They've got it down to like 6%. $11 billion is $110 billion of leverage for the banks to use in its activities such as propping up the stock market. This certainly explains why there appears to be a V recovery in the stock market after a near 10% drawdown in the Dow and SPX. This is very similar to 10% market plunges in August of 2015 and January 2016, both of which were followed by highly unusual V recoveries. This is also likely the catalyst that powered gold's $41 rise since February 9th. Clearly, the Federal Reserve, notwithstanding the fecal odor that emanates from the Fed officials' mouths when they speak. You know what fecal matter is? Anyway, I'm not going to go into too much depth of explaining it, but it doesn't smell good. It has an implicit monetary policy that targets stock prices. Furthermore, the Fed must be getting worried about the housing market, removing $11 billion in mortgage securities from the banking system and replacing those securities with cash. It was likely a move targeted at a rate spread between conventional mortgages and 10-year treasuries. Mortgage purchase applications plunged 6% last week. This was without question in response to mortgage rates pushed meaningfully higher by a raising 10-year treasury yield and a widening of spreads associated with higher volatility in the markets. I remain highly skeptical that the Fed will actually follow through with its stated plan to raise monthly its balance sheet reduction to $30 billion this year. They're not going to raise it to $30 billion, they're going to raise it to $50. $30 billion is what's coming in March. In fact, the Fed has yet to disclose a definitive schedule for said balance sheet reduction. I'm taking wagers that we do not see this occur. And there's a reason why. There's a reason why Dave Kranzler is saying that this will not occur. And his reasoning is that he believes that the Fed has our best interests at heart. He believes that the Fed is working for us and that they would never cause a crash to happen. He knows that if the Fed continues on this path of balance sheet reduction to $30 billion, that boom, crash, the economy's going to crash. So what does he say here? He says, I remain highly skeptical that the Fed will actually follow through with its stated plan. Well, this is like if you had a guy that's standing on the edge of a cliff ready to jump. You think to yourself, hey, you know what? I'm highly skeptical he's going to jump, because if he jumps, he's going to go splat. So he won't jump. Right? But you're thinking that he's going to act in a rational, logical manner. The Fed don't care about us, and they're not going to act rationally or logically. They quite literally want this crash, I believe, personally, and that they've been planning it. And this is what he's not getting. So I read it again. He says, I remain highly skeptical that the Fed will actually follow through with its stated plan to raise monthly its balance sheet reduction to $30 billion this year. And I know why he's saying that, because it would be nuts. They're going to create a crash if they do. So he don't think they will, because he don't think they're that suicidal. Says the Fed has yet to disclose its definitive schedule for said balance sheet reduction. I am taking wagers that we do not see this occur. He's taking wagers that we do not see this occur. I'm saying, hey, they're doing it. They're already doing it. You know, they're following through. The Fed's following through, because they're not going to do what you think they're going to do. They're going to surprise you. They're going to keep raising interest rates, and they're going to keep up with their balance reduction. But see, now, what he talked about here when he said the Fed added $11 billion to its SOMA account for this week, ending Wednesday, what this is like a fat guy. The Fed's like a fat guy who's went on a diet, right? And he's actually sticking to his diet pretty good. But at lunchtime, he has a jelly donut. And that's what this is like, this $11 billion at Soma account added to the week of Wednesday. It purchased $11 billion in mortgage-backed securities. I think it's got to do with their timing. They don't want to bring the crash just quite yet. I think the Fed is like holding it back just a little bit. I think that they've been planning this crash and they have a certain time schedule that they're following, and they are doing things behind the scenes that we don't even know about. And some things we do find out about, like this. We found out about this, and that the banks can leverage this money to $110 billion. So we found out about this. So I've discussed what they're doing here. Now I'm going to get into telling you how I knew what the stock market was going to do, my logic behind my thinking and what the stock market was going to do, and why I think this crash is actually coming. And I'm going to use an illustration to help you understand my logic. In my mind, I pictured it like this. I pictured it like a normal guy on a hot summer day, and he's a normal, healthy, young, say, 22-year-old guy. You know, he's sitting at a table. And they bring him up. He's thirsty, too, right? So they bring him up a quart of ice water. A quart. So that's a whole quart of ice water. And he slugs it down. Well, that first quart of ice water he drinks, because he's a healthy 22-year-old guy, and he's got a stomach that's like a cast iron frying pan. He can drink down a whole quart of cold water, and it doesn't bother him that much. It just cools him off a little bit, and he likes it. And he was thirsty, and that first quart of water goes down easy. There's nothing to it. He doesn't feel any effect from it. This is what the effect was in October, November, and December of the Fed doing the first raising $10 billion. Right? The effect was absorbed. We never noticed much of any effect whatsoever. Bond prices didn't go up that much. I mean, bond yields didn't go up that much. That was like the first cup of ice water, right? Well, this is scheduled. So picture the young man is sitting down at the table, and they've scheduled for him to drink more than that one quart of ice water. So they bring him over the next quart and sit it down, the tankard at the table, and say he's filming a YouTube video for this, and it's like a drinking contest. Okay? So they say, okay, drink up your second quart of ice water. He finishes that second quart of ice water, and his stomach reacts to it. And he starts to get a little bit sick, and he starts to get a little bit groggy, and he's a little bit upset to his stomach, and he might even vomit a little bit when the second quart goes down. Well, this is the reaction that we had to the stock market in January from this second raising of the bar up to 20 billion. It's like drinking that second quart of ice water, right? Now what's happened is he's taken about all he can take, but he's handled it. He's drank the second quart of ice water, and now it's in his stomach, and it's starting to warm up, and he's handled it, and his stomach's handled it, and he's got the 2 quarts down, a half a gallon of the stuff, and his stomach's starting to warm it up, and he's starting to feel better, and his stomach's not so upset anymore and stuff. He's starting to recover. And this is the way I saw, in my mind, those 10 billion and the 20 billion, like this ice water. And so I thought about it that way, and that is how I deducted that the financial system would be able to accept the second quart. And of course, it's not a quart, but it's the second 10 billion. I figured that they'd be able to handle it, and that they would absorb it, make them a little bit sick at first. It was exactly the reaction that I saw coming, that the stock markets would get a little bit sick, but then after it started to warm up in his stomach, he started to feel a little bit better. And then after a little while, he's okay again. And that's what the stock markets would do. They'd be okay. And if they're okay, they'd start to rise back up again. Because that's what they naturally wanted to do. We were working with a Teflon stock market that just wanted to go up and up. It was melting up. right? So I figured that's what would happen. I figured it would recover and the whole thing would accept that second quart of ice water. And it's not ice water, it's the second 10 billion that the Fed was giving them. But it's like giving them a shot of ice water. So now what's going to happen is they're going to let the young man sit there for 15 minutes, and then the timer's going to expire, and he's going to have to drink the third quart of ice water. So he's fine right now. The stock market's fine. Okay? The 15 minutes is the equal of us March, coming to March, see? In my mind, see, this is how I'm seeing it. So what's going to happen when the young man drinks that third quart of ice water? Well, I can tell you what's going to happen. Because there's already 2 quarts down there, and it's not fully warmed yet to the body temperature. And he drinks that third quart down, it's going to be too much for him, and he's going to vomit all over the place. He's going to be really full-scale sick, laying on the floor, take me to the hospital. Sick. That's what's going to happen when he drinks the third quart. That, in my mind, that's what I see happening to him. So now let's compare that to the stock market. That's when they raise, the third quart is the 30 billion coming in March, at the end of March. They're going to raise up the bar up to 30 billion. That's like the third quart of water. And the stock market is like the young man getting sick and vomiting. That's the stock market. It's going to fall, collapse, down to the floor. The floor being what it was before the irrational exuberance started. So it's going to pass 14,000 down to probably 11, 12, 13, along in there someplace. And then it's going to bottom out, and it's going to start to go back up again. But during that time, when it's at that bottom, now you got all these banks and stuff out there, and all these credit derivative products and everything else that's going to start melting down when the stock market falls like that. Because it's going to be such an abrupt, big fall. They cannot. Take a look at Lynette Zhang's work. She does great work. She's said how the banks can't stand. They're so leveraged, they can't stand more than a 4% decrease in the stock market. Well, they're going to get more than a 4%. They've already had it. I don't know how they're surviving this last 10%, but they got a good bounce back. Anyway, we're talking about a lot more. We're talking about it going down to 12,000. We're talking about a 50%, more than a 50%, probably a 55% decline in the stock market. You're going to see a meltdown in the banking system. Certain too-big-to-fail banks are going to go down, and it's going to start chain reaction. What's going to happen then is the system is going to just freeze. And when it freezes, then they're going to be forced into coming into the rescue. And the only thing that they can do is monetary stimulus, up the yin-yang. Monetary stimulus up the yin-yang, and that's going to kill the dollar. But it's going to save the system. Save the system and kill the dollar. But isn't that the exact picture you got on the Economist magazine back in 1988 when they show all the currencies burning under the feet of the phoenix? Okay, so it said 2018 on the cover of the magazine. How ironic is that? The timing, I'd say, is absolutely perfect. So here's the thing. Now you kind of know my logic, of my way of thinking of how I kind of figured this out, that this stock market crash is coming in April, because that's the third cup of ice water. So now let's just carry this a little bit further. Let's say that the young guy downs that third cup of ice water, and for some way or another, he is able to actually accept it, and he doesn't get sick this time, or he only gets a little bit sick. Like the second glass made him a little bit sick. Well, guess what? There's a fourth glass coming. And a fifth glass coming. Every 3 weeks. And the Fed's not going to stop this until they get the crash. They're going to go all the way to 50 billion. So if we go back to this article here. Where was it? Dave Kranzler. And he says right here, I remain highly skeptical that the Fed will actually follow through with its stated plan to raise monthly its balance sheet reduction to 30 billion. They're not going to stop at 30. If that doesn't work, bringing the economy down, the Fed's going to go to 40, and in the end, they're going to go to 50. Nearly double the 30. He doesn't think that they're going to do the 30, and he thinks that that's like the man standing on the edge of the cliff, and you say, well, he'll never jump off of there, because if he jumps, he's going to go splat on the rocks down below. So you think he'll never jump. Sometimes you're wrong. Sometimes he's suicidal and he goes right off. Boom. Right? And this is the thing with this 30 billion. You think, oh no, the Fed would never do that, you know. They would never try to run their balance sheet reduction to 30 billion. Well, they're already on their way. They're already at 20. He says, I'm taking wagers that we do not see this occur. Because he thinks they're not that crazy to do that. Well, actually, I don't think it's crazy. I think that they're doing it because it's all scheduled, according to that magazine cover, 2018 magazine cover, which showed us this whole thing unfolding this year. And this is the trigger. This is the trigger mechanism, is these rising rates. And because everything is priced on the 10-year. Everything. All the debt's priced on it. Everything's priced on it. It is the benchmark of all debt. And if you understand that credit is debt and debt is credit, then the entire credit-based system is all based on the cost of borrowing money. All of the credit derivatives are all based on the cost of borrowing money. Watch the Fed. Watch what the Fed's doing. Interest rates start to go up. This whole system's going to come down around their ears. And it's going to happen. It's going to happen unless the Fed backs off. Now, what he thinks here is he thinks that the Fed is backing off because he sees this purchase of $11 billion. But I don't think they're backing off. I think they're still continuing on. I think they did this one little purchase here, and it's a one-off, and the sign that they're continuing on is the fact that the 10-year rates and all the rates yields are rising, and they're going to continue to rise. I'll tell you where the problem's going to be. Right up front, the problem is when these yields on the 10-year crest 3%. And I think we're going to get the crash when it gets up around 3.15 or 3.25, somewhere along in there. That's when I'm expecting the crash. And it's going to be monumentous. It's going to be scary. And when the real fear hits. Now, I'm going to tell you something. I want you to listen very carefully because I've got a few comments about this. I said that Bitcoin's going to rise when the stock market crashes. And that's true. But only in the first little while. Just for the first little bit. When the crash continues, then all of a sudden the whole thing's going to change. When the fear starts to enter in. See, it's the same way with gold and silver. In the first part of the crash, you'll see gold and silver actually probably go down a little bit. When the crash continues and the fear enters in, that's when you're going to see everything change. That's when you're going to see Bitcoin go down. And Bitcoin's going to crash too with the market. When the market probably, I would say, I'm just going to guess, I'm going to say that the fear is going to enter in when the market goes below 20,000. When the market goes below 20,000, it might start to enter in when the market gets down around 22,000, you know. But when it goes below 20,000, the fear is going to come in big time, major fear, and you're going to see gold and silver shoot up like a rocket. You're going to see Bitcoin absolutely get killed. What you're going to see is a few people will start to sell Bitcoin to trade off into cash when they get really scared when the market goes below 20,000. The Dow Jones goes below 20,000. They're going to get really scared. They're going to trade off Bitcoins for cash, probably a few big players. They're going to move into cash. And when they do that, then everybody else is going to see Bitcoin dropping precipitously, and they're all going to file in behind. They're all going to come in, and they're all going to feel the fear, and the market's going to be crashing, really crashing crazy like, and the fear is going to be dynamic at that point. And you're going to see Bitcoin start to crash crazy like, and the fear is going to enter into the cryptocurrency markets because they're speculative markets at this point. People are not, when people get really frightened, they will sell any speculative position. Now hear what I just said. When people get really frightened, they'll sell any speculative position. They'll hang on to any safe haven asset when they get really frightened. So they're going to hang on to their gold and silver like anything. They're not going to sell it. And they're going to hang on to their cash. But everything else is going to be in just a frenzy to sell, sell, sell. It's going to be like a margin call, for crying out loud. And everything's just, the bottom's going to be dropping out of everything. This is going to be frightening when this comes. And the Fed is inducing it. So now you kind of have an idea of my logic behind what I'm thinking. It might, to some people, it might sound silly, but this is how my mind works. It works like in comparative logic. What I do is I'll compare it to something in the real world, like him drinking the cups of ice cold water, as an example of how that would function in the real world and how it functions in the economy in a similar way, like a comparative analysis of some sort. I don't know exactly how to explain it, but it works for me. And I mean, I was correct on this, where an awful lot of other people were wrong. They thought the market was going to continue to fall. They thought it was a dead cat bounce was coming. And I started to actually, I was listening to them out there, and I started to second think myself a little bit at certain times. You know, I started to I started to think, could I be right about this? And I started to think too much, you know. And if you think too much sometimes, then you can get it wrong again, you know. Generally, your first reaction with logical deduction, using something like Sherlock Holmes would use, generally gives you a correct answer. You know, you deduce it in your mind, and you generally come up with a correct answer. And then if you overthink that too much, then you might question yourself. When you start questioning yourself, then you'll get it wrong. So, thank you guys for listening. Just trying to give you a idea how I come up with this this idea that we're going to have a crash in April, and why I think we're going to have a crash in April, why I think it's coming. Has got everything to do with the Fed. And, of course, now you have to understand, if the Fed backs off of their position, like he says here, Dave Kranzler, then I'm going to be wrong. And he says, this is his words, he says, I remain highly skeptical that the Fed will actually follow through with its stated plan to raise monthly its balance sheet reduction to $30 billion this year. So if he's right and they don't, then I'm going to be wrong. But I think that the Fed is going to continue on with this. And one of the reasons why I think that is looking at that magazine cover. It says 2018. And it shows all the currencies burning, because that's what's going to happen. If they continue with this, they are going to actually induce a hyperinflation before the end of this year. So listen, thank you guys for listening. Like and subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next show. Bye.